My name is Emma Rodriguez, and I'm 28 years old. I never thought the people who brought me into this world would tear my heart out over dinner. But there I was, sitting at our family table in Billings, Montana, watching my mother's face turn to stone as she spoke words that still echo in my nightmares. You are no longer part of this family. Pack your things and leave tonight. The fork in my hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My father sat there like a statue, his eyes fixed on his plate as if it held the secrets of the universe. My older brother Marcus just leaned back in his chair with that smug smile I'd grown to hate. The silence stretched between us like a canyon, filled only with the sound of my heart hammering against my ribs. I tried to speak, to ask why, to beg them to explain what I had done wrong. But before I could form the words, they all stood up in perfect synchronization, like they'd rehearsed this moment. My mother pointed toward the front door with the same finger she'd used to teach me how to tie my shoes when I was 5. Get out, now. I stumbled through the house I'd called home for 28 years, grabbing my laptop bag and a few clothes, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip my suitcase. The front door slammed behind me with a sound that felt like the end of everything I'd ever known. I heard the deadbolt turn, sealing me out of the only life I'd ever understood. Standing on the porch where I'd played as a child, I fumbled for my house key, some desperate part of me believing this was all a terrible mistake. The key slid into the lock, but it wouldn't turn. They'd already changed it. In the span of one dinner conversation, I'd become a stranger to my own home. I spent that first night in a roadside motel, staring at water stains on the ceiling and trying to piece together what had gone so wrong. Was it because I'd refused to give up my dream of writing screenplays? Because I wouldn't fall in line with their plans for my future? The questions spun in my mind like a tornado, destroying any hope of sleep. Growing up as a Rodriguez in Billings meant living under the shadow of family expectations that felt heavier than the Montana sky. My mother, Carmen Rodriguez, had built our family's catering business from absolutely nothing, working 18-hour days to turn Sunday dinners into corporate events and wedding receptions. She ran Rodriguez Catering like a military operation, with precision that would make a general proud. Every conversation in our house revolved around client lists, menu planning, and profit margins. My father, Miguel Rodriguez, handled the books with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd learned that agreeing with my mother was the path of least resistance. He'd nod along to her strategies, his silence speaking volumes about who really ran our household. Then there was Marcus, 5 years older and everything my parents had ever wanted in a son. He thrived in the catering world, charming clients and executing events with the kind of natural talent that made my mother beam with pride. Marcus soaked up her approval like desert sand drinks rain, and he never let me forget that I was the family disappointment. While they obsessed over garnish presentations and seating arrangements, I found myself drawn to stories. I'd sneak away during family events to scribble dialogue in notebooks, creating characters who felt more real to me than the people placing orders for prime rib and champagne toasts. But to my family, writing was nothing more than an expensive hobby that wouldn't pay the bills. You need to focus on reality, Emma. My mother would snap whenever I mentioned submitting a script to a production company. This business keeps food on our table and a roof over our heads. Your little stories won't do that. Marcus would pile on with his trademark cruelty, rolling his eyes dramatically whenever I talked about my latest project. Keep dreaming, little sister, he'd say with a laugh that cut deeper than any knife. But don't expect the rest of us to fund your fantasy life. Even my father, who rarely spoke unless spoken to, would shake his head when the topic came up. The catering business is steady work, Emma, steady and reliable. That word, reliable, became like a prison cell in my mind. But there was one person who understood my passion, who saw the fire in my eyes when I talked about storytelling. My grandmother, Isabel Martinez, was different from the rest of my family in every way that mattered. While they saw my writing as a waste of time, she saw it as a gift that needed nurturing. Grandma Isabel would sit with me on her back porch for hours, her weathered hands steady as she helped me craft dialogue that sang with truth. "Your stories have power, Emma," she'd tell me, her voice warm with conviction. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." We'd spend entire afternoons analyzing classic films, breaking down every scene, and discussing what made certain characters unforgettable. She'd write notes in the margins of my scripts, her elegant handwriting filling the pages with encouragement and wisdom. "Keep going, Mija," she'd whisper when doubt crept in. "The world needs voices like yours." Those moments with Grandma Isabel were my lifeline, the only times I felt truly seen and understood. When she passed away 3 years ago, the loss left a hole in my heart that nothing could fill. But even in death, her words continued to echo in my mind, pushing me forward when everyone else tried to hold me back. The pressure from my family never relented. They saw the catering business as our legacy, something sacred that demanded my complete devotion. As a child, I'd been dragged to every event, carrying tablecloths and arranging centerpieces while dreaming of the stories I'd write when I got home. Even at 12 years old, I'd find ways to escape during receptions, hiding in coat closets with my notebook to capture overheard conversations and interesting characters. My mother caught me once, her face twisted with disappointment that still makes me cringe. "You're not here to play writer, Emma. This is your future we're building." I was 12 years old. By the time I reached my 20s, I'd moved out of the family home and thrown myself into Billings' small but passionate film community. I took every odd job I could find, working as a production assistant on local commercials and independent films, soaking up knowledge like a sponge. But when my first real break came, a chance to work on a feature film that would showcase my writing, the project collapsed when funding fell through. The failure hit me like a physical blow, leaving me broke, heartbroken, and with nowhere to turn except back to the family home I'd fought so hard to escape. Walking through that front door with my tail between my legs felt like admitting defeat to everyone who'd ever doubted me. The looks on their faces said everything they didn't dare speak out loud. I was a failure who'd crawled back home after chasing impossible dreams. My mother's expression mixed disappointment with something that looked almost like satisfaction, as if my return proved she'd been right all along. Living back home felt like walking through a minefield every single day. My mother launched a relentless campaign to drag me into the catering business, presenting it as my last chance at redemption. "You could excel at this, Emma," she'd say, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You have organizational skills and an eye for detail. Stop wasting them on fantasies." Marcus would hover nearby during these conversations, adding his own brand of poison to the mix. "She'd probably mess up our client relationships, Mom. Stick with what works." His words were designed to cut, and they found their target every time. My father maintained his policy of strategic silence, sipping his coffee and avoiding eye contact whenever the subject of my future came up. His refusal to take sides felt like taking theirs, and the betrayal stung more than I expected. I tried to keep writing, locking myself in my childhood bedroom and typing late into the night while the rest of the house slept. But their voices seemed to seep through the walls, filling my head with doubt and criticism that made every word feel forced and false. My scripts became my secret shame, projects I had to hide, like contraband. Grandma Isabel's old typewriter sat on my desk, a reminder of her faith in my abilities. I'd run my fingers over its keys, remembering her lessons about storytelling and heart. A good story needs truth, Emma, she'd told me countless times. Don't let anyone steal that truth from you. But truth felt impossible to capture when my mother would barge into my room without knocking, dropping catering proposals on my desk like homework assignments. Read these, she'd command. Learn something useful for once. I'd nod and smile. But my mind was always elsewhere, lost in the stories I'd never finish. Marcus's attacks grew sharper and more personal as the weeks passed. Still writing your little movies, he'd say, leaning against my doorframe with that superior smirk. When are you going to grow up and join the real world, Emma? I started questioning everything about myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe my dreams were nothing more than childish fantasies that I'd clung to for too long. Maybe it was time to accept reality and surrender to their vision of my future. But every time I came close to giving up completely, I'd remember Grandma Isabel's face, hear her voice, urging me to fight for what I believed in. She'd seen something in me that no one else could recognize, and that belief felt like the only thing keeping me anchored to hope. The tension in our house grew thicker with each passing day. My mother scheduled me for back-to-back catering events, leaving no time for writing or even thinking about my own goals. "You're not contributing enough," she'd snap whenever I missed a deadline or made a mistake. "This family business requires total commitment." Marcus would pile on with his usual cruelty, dropping comments designed to crush whatever confidence I had left. "Maybe if you actually focused on something important, you'd be worth keeping around," he'd say with a laugh that made my skin crawl. I'd bite my tongue and swallow my anger, but inside I was screaming. I felt like a prisoner in my own life, trapped by expectations I'd never chosen, and dreams that felt further away with each passing hour. Late at night, I'd sneak phone calls to friends in the film industry, asking about new opportunities and submission deadlines. But rejection letters kept arriving like clockwork, each one feeling like another nail in the coffin of my ambitions. One evening, I sat at my desk staring at my latest screenplay, a story about a woman who found the courage to stand up to her controlling family. I'd written a scene where the heroine finally spoke her truth, her voice strong and unwavering in the face of opposition. I wanted to be her. I needed to be her. But the gap between fiction and reality felt impossible to bridge. Something was building inside me, a pressure that couldn't be contained much longer. I closed my laptop and stared at my reflection in the dark window, seeing a stranger who'd lost herself somewhere along the way. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to keep hiding anymore. The dinner that destroyed my world started like any other family meal. We sat around the dining room table where I'd eaten thousands of dinners, the familiar smell of my mother's cooking filling the air. But something felt different that night, a tension crackling between us like electricity before a storm. My mother set down her fork and fixed me with the stare I'd learned to fear as a child. "Emma, we need to discuss your future, once and for all." Her voice carried the weight of finality, like a judge delivering a verdict. I knew what was coming. Another lecture about abandoning my writing dreams and embracing the catering business as my destiny. I'd heard the same speech dozens of times, but something inside me snapped that night. I was done being their punching bag. "I'm not giving up my screenwriting," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's who I am, and it's what I love." The words hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at their feet. My mother's eyes narrowed into slits. "Love doesn't pay rent, Emma. This family built something real and lasting. You're throwing it all away for make-believe stories that nobody wants to read." I felt my hands clench into fists under the table, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. Those stories aren't make-believe to me, Mom. They're my truth, my voice, my contribution to the world. Marcus let out a harsh laugh that cut through me like broken glass. Your contribution? He sneered. Emma, you've been rejected by every production company in Montana. Face the facts. You're not good enough. And you never will be. His words hit their target, but instead of crumbling, I felt something fierce and protective rise up inside me. At least I'm trying, Marcus. At least I'm brave enough to chase something meaningful, instead of just following orders like a trained dog. The color drained from his face, and for a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker in his eyes. But my father chose that moment to speak, his voice quiet but devastating. That's enough, Emma. You're embarrassing this entire family with your childish behavior. I turned to him, desperate for some sign of support, some indication that he understood what this meant to me. Dad, please, you know how hard I've been working. Why can't you believe in me the way Grandma Isabel did? He looked away, his jaw clenched tight with discomfort. Your grandmother filled your head with unrealistic expectations, Emma. It's time to let go of those fantasies and join the real world. His words felt like a physical slap. My mother stood up, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. She looked down at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold and final, and utterly without love. This is your home, Emma, but only if you're willing to be part of this family. If you choose your selfish dreams over us, then you're choosing to leave. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. What are you saying? My voice came out as barely a whisper. My mother's face could have been carved from stone. You are no longer part of this family. Get out of my house. Now. Marcus leaned back in his chair with satisfaction written across his features. My father just stared at his plate like it contained the answers to life's greatest mysteries. Nobody moved to stop what was happening. Nobody spoke up for me. I stood on shaking legs and grabbed my bag from the counter, my movements feeling disconnected from my body. You can't be serious, I said, my voice breaking. This is my home. You're my family. But my mother pointed toward the door with unwavering determination. Leave. Right now. Before I call the police. I stumbled toward the exit, turning back one last time to see if anyone would change their mind. If anyone would remember that they loved me. But 3 faces stared back at me with varying degrees of coldness and indifference. The front door slammed behind me with the finality of a coffin lid. I heard the deadbolt turn, sealing me out of the only life I'd ever known. I pounded on the door with both fists, shouting their names until my voice went hoarse, but no one answered. My house key, the one I'd carried since I was 16, wouldn't turn in the lock. They'd changed it already, probably hours before our dinner conversation. This hadn't been a spontaneous decision. They'd planned this execution carefully. I ended up at a budget motel on the outskirts of town, sitting on a bed that smelled like disinfectant and despair. My phone buzzed with text messages I was afraid to read. So I turned it off and stared at the ceiling instead. How had it come to this? How had the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally become my worst enemies? The questions swirled in my mind like vultures, picking at the remains of my shattered heart. I thought about calling friends, but shame kept my fingers frozen over the phone. How do you explain that your own family has disowned you for refusing to give up your dreams? How do you admit that the people who raised you think you're worthless? Sleep was impossible, so I opened my laptop and tried to write. But the words wouldn't come. For the first time in my life, my stories had abandoned me when I needed them most. The next morning brought a new horror. I checked my bank account and discovered that my shared emergency fund with Marcus had been emptied. $2,000. Gone without a trace. I called the bank with trembling fingers, and they confirmed that Marcus Rodriguez had withdrawn every penny the day before. He'd stolen my safety net, my backup plan, my last hope of independence. The betrayal cut deeper than anything my mother had said or my father had failed to say. This was my brother, the person who'd taught me how to ride a bike and helped me with homework when we were kids. I tried calling him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, my voice cracking with emotion. Why, Marcus? That money was supposed to be for emergencies. How could you do this to me? He never called back. 7 days after my family destroyed my world, my phone buzzed with an email that changed everything. I was still hiding in that depressing motel room, surviving on vending machine snacks and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing. The sender was someone named David Chen, and the subject line made my heart skip a beat. Urgent matter regarding Isabel Martinez Trust. Please contact immediately. Isabel Martinez. My grandmother's name sent a shockwave through my system. I hadn't heard anything about a trust, but seeing her name felt like receiving a message from beyond the grave. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number in the email signature. Emma. David's voice was professional but kind. Your grandmother established a trust fund before she passed away. It guarantees your right to housing and provides financial support for your screenwriting career. I nearly dropped the phone. A trust fund? For my writing? The words didn't seem real, like something out of one of my scripts, rather than my actual life. There's more, David continued. Isabel left a personal letter for you, along with detailed instructions about how the trust should be managed. I can meet with you tomorrow to go over everything. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions and possibilities that seemed too good to be true. Had Grandma Isabel really planned for this moment? Had she somehow known that my family would abandon me for following my dreams? The next afternoon, David Chen sat across from me in a small conference room, a thick manila envelope between us. He was younger than I'd expected, with kind eyes that reminded me of my grandmother's gentle nature. Isabel was very specific about her wishes, he explained, sliding documents across the table. She wanted to protect you from family members who might not understand your artistic pursuits. She saw this situation coming years ago. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and pulled out a letter written in Grandma Isabel's familiar handwriting. The sight of her careful script made tears blur my vision, but I blinked them away and began to read. My dearest Emma, the letter began, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. Your mother, your father, and your brother have tried to crush your spirit and steal your dreams. But I won't let them succeed. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling her love reach across the divide between life and death. She'd known exactly what would happen, and she'd prepared a way to save me. The trust is substantial, David explained while I composed myself. Isabel set aside enough money to cover your living expenses for several years, plus additional funds specifically designated for your screenwriting projects. She also included provisions for housing. I read further into the letter, my grandmother's words wrapping around me like a warm embrace. Your stories matter, Emma. They always have, and they always will. Don't let anyone convince you that your dreams are worthless. This trust is my gift to your future, my investment in the beautiful stories you'll tell the world. She wrote about watching me as a child, scribbling tales in notebooks, while the rest of the family focused on catering logistics. She'd seen my passion even then, nurturing it in secret while my parents tried to reshape me into their vision of success. Your mother wanted you to fit her mold, the letter continued. But I saw your fire, your unique voice, that the world needs to hear. This trust is your freedom, Emma. Use it wisely, and never apologize for being exactly who you're meant to be. David explained the legal details while I struggled to process the enormity of what was happening. The trust had been managed by my parents since Grandma Isabel's death, but they'd never told me about its existence. In fact, there were significant irregularities in how the funds had been handled. What kind of irregularities? I asked, though part of me already suspected the answer. He pulled out bank statements and financial records that made my stomach clench with anger. Over $50,000 had been withdrawn from the trust and used to upgrade Rodriguez Catering's equipment and marketing materials. The transactions were signed by both my parents, with Marcus listed as a witness. They'd stolen from my grandmother's gift to me, using the money meant for my dreams to fund their own business expansion. The betrayal felt like a fresh wound on top of everything else they'd done. This is clear misappropriation of trust funds, David said grimly. We can pursue legal action to recover the money and ensure this never happens again. I stared at the evidence of their theft, feeling a cold fury settle in my chest. They hadn't just disowned me, they'd been robbing my future for 3 years, spending my grandmother's love on tablecloths and catering trucks. What are my options? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. David outlined a plan that felt like justice wrapped in legal terminology. We could force them to repay the stolen funds, transfer full control of the trust to me, and secure housing that would be completely independent of their influence. The trust included a provision for purchasing property in my name, something Grandma Isabel had insisted on as protection against exactly this situation. I could have my own place, funded by her love and protected by her foresight. I thought about my family sitting around their dinner table, probably congratulating themselves on getting rid of their troublesome daughter. They had no idea that their victim was about to become their reckoning. Do it, I told David, signing papers that would change everything. All of it. I want every penny back, and I want them to understand that their actions have consequences. As I walked out of David's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Grandma Isabel's death. Hope. Real, tangible hope that my future could be different from the nightmare my family had created. That evening, I called my parents for the first time since they'd thrown me out. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice cold and dismissive. What do you want, Emma? I thought we made ourselves clear. I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. You're going to be hearing from a lawyer tomorrow, Mom. About Grandma Isabel's trust fund. The one you've been stealing from for 3 years. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and uncertain. I don't know what you're talking about, but I knew she was lying, and she knew I knew. The power dynamic between us had shifted completely, and for the first time in my life, I held all the cards. You'll understand soon enough, I said, and hung up the phone. 3 weeks later, I stood in the living room of my own apartment, keys warm in my palm and sunlight streaming through windows that belonged to me. The legal proceedings had moved faster than anyone expected, probably because my family's theft was so blatant that even their lawyer advised them to settle quickly. David had found me a perfect one-bedroom place in downtown Billings, close enough to the film community but far enough from my family's catering empire. The trust had covered the purchase completely, with enough left over to support my writing for years to come. My parents and Marcus had been forced to repay every stolen penny plus interest and legal fees. The financial strain had hit Rodriguez Catering hard, with several major clients canceling contracts when word of the lawsuit spread through Billings' tight-knit business community. I didn't take pleasure in their downfall, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing that actions have consequences. They'd gambled with my future, and lost everything they'd built in the process. The apartment felt like a sanctuary after months of uncertainty. I'd bought a simple desk and placed it by the window, where natural light would illuminate whatever stories wanted to flow through me. Grandma Isabel's old typewriter sat beside my laptop, a reminder that some dreams are worth fighting for. I'd blocked my family's phone numbers and deleted their social media contacts. Marcus had tried calling once, leaving a voicemail full of bitter accusations about destroying the family business. I erased it without listening to the whole thing. His words couldn't hurt me anymore. My father never reached out at all, which stung more than I expected. Part of me had hoped he might apologize or explain why he'd stayed silent when I needed him most. But his continued silence spoke louder than any words could have. 2 months into my new life, something extraordinary happened. I'd been working on a screenplay about family betrayal and second chances, pouring all my pain and hope into characters who felt more real than the people who'd raised me. The story was raw and honest, exactly the kind of truth Grandma Isabel had always encouraged me to tell. I submitted it to the Rocky Mountain Film Festival on a whim, not expecting anything beyond another rejection letter. But they not only accepted it, they selected it as a finalist for their Emerging Screenwriter Award. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was making coffee in my sunny kitchen. Emma Rodriguez, the festival director, said, "Your script moved our entire selection committee to tears. We'd love to discuss development opportunities with you." I hung up the phone and stood in my kitchen, overwhelmed by the realization that my dream was actually happening. Real film industry professionals wanted to work with me, to help bring my stories to life. That afternoon, I visited Grandma Isabel's grave for the first time since the funeral. I sat beside her headstone and told her everything that had happened, from the family dinner that destroyed my old life, to the phone call that launched my new one. "I wish you could see this, Grandma," I whispered to the wind. "You were right about everything. My stories do matter, and I'm finally brave enough to tell them." A week later, I was sitting in a conference room with 3 film producers, discussing budget and casting for a short film based on my script. They talked about my characters like they were real people, analyzing their motivations and discussing how to bring their emotional journey to the screen. One of the producers, a woman named Sarah, who reminded me of Grandma Isabel's fierce intelligence, leaned forward with excitement in her eyes. "Emma, you have a unique voice that this industry desperately needs. We want to support you in developing that voice." As autumn settled over Billings, my life took on a rhythm I'd never experienced before. I'd wake up in my own space, make coffee in my own kitchen, and sit down to write stories that mattered to me. The words flowed freely now, unburdened by other people's expectations or limitations. I started attending local film screenings and industry meetups, connecting with other writers and filmmakers who understood the importance of storytelling. For the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who celebrated my dreams instead of mocking them. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about my family and wonder if they ever regretted their choices. Did my mother miss having a daughter? Did my father wish he'd spoken up when it mattered? Did Marcus ever think about the sister he'd betrayed? But those thoughts no longer consumed me with pain. I'd learned that some people are incapable of seeing beyond their own narrow vision of success, and that their limitations don't have to become yours. The film festival screening was everything I'd dreamed it would be. Sitting in a darkened theater, watching my words come to life on screen, I felt Grandma Isabel's presence like a warm hand on my shoulder. The audience laughed at the funny moments and fell silent during the emotional scenes, completely invested in the story I'd fought so hard to tell. After the screening, a young filmmaker approached me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for writing this," she said. "It made me feel less alone in my own family struggles." That's when I understood the real power of storytelling. My pain had become something larger than myself. A bridge connecting me to others who needed to know they weren't alone in their battles. 6 months after my family disowned me, I signed my first professional screenwriting contract. The producer wanted to option my script for a feature film, with me attached as the writer. It wasn't Hollywood money, but it was real industry recognition and enough financial security to keep pursuing my dreams. I called David Chen to share the news, since he'd become more than just my lawyer. He'd become a friend who'd helped me navigate the scariest period of my life. "Isabel would be so proud," he said. And I could hear the smile in his voice. She always believed this day would come. Standing on my apartment balcony that evening, watching the sun set over the Yellowstone River, I felt a peace I'd never known before. My story wasn't finished, but for the first time in my life, I was writing it entirely on my own terms. The family who'd raised me was gone, but I'd found something better. I'd found myself, my voice, and my place in a world that was hungry for the stories only I could tell. Grandma Isabel had been right about everything. My dreams weren't too big or too impossible. I just needed to be brave enough to fight for them, even when fighting meant losing everything I thought I needed. Some battles are worth every scar they leave behind. Some dreams are worth rebuilding your entire life to achieve. And some families are the ones you choose, not the ones you're born into.